Continuing our examination of the Olivet Discourse, Christ's most personal warning to his followers about the things that would happen before his return and the end of the age. In this segment, Christ describes the Great Tribulation, from the beginning at the abomination that causes desolation to the very end, warning his followers not to believe everything they hear and see. I am Richard Perry, and this is a picture of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, taken from the Mount of Olives, where Jesus was when he described these things to his disciples. Now let's examine what Christ has to say about the time of the Great Tribulation. The Great Tribulation is the last half of Daniel's 70th seven, and it is the last 3.5 years of the time of the end. The time of the end is a period of less than a generation, approximately 40 years, which will end with the second coming of Christ. Here, Jesus tells his followers about the event that will start the period of the Great Tribulation. He says, "So, when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, as spoken of by the prophet Daniel," he said, "let the reader understand." He wants them to understand this event. Paul described this event when he talked about the man of lawlessness would go into the temple of God and setting himself up, proclaiming that he was God. So when we see the Antichrist standing in the temple, Christ says, "Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof of the house go down and take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back and get his cloak. How dreadful it would be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place on the Sabbath. On the Sabbath or in the winter, travel is difficult. On the Sabbath, things are shut down." Christ says, when you see the abomination that causes desolation, flee fast. Then Jesus tells his followers about what will happen next after the abomination. He says, "For then there will be great tribulation, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again." Great tribulation is persecution, suffering, and death. And this passage here is almost a quote from Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, where Daniel describes the Great Tribulation in almost these same words. Then Christ describes the situation, saying, "If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened." Some people have misinterpreted this passage to think that the last 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation would be cut short. But Daniel's prophecies are very clear, and Revelation is very clear. The time of persecution is 3.5 years long. Christ means that he will cut the persecution from the Antichrist short. When Christ started telling his disciples about what would happen during the time of the end, he warned them about being deceived. And here again he picks up on that topic. He said, "If anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. False Christ and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive the elect." We're even told in Revelation how the false prophet himself will cause fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men. The Antichrist himself appears to rise from the dead at some point, so clearly we can't believe everything we see and hear. He says that this deception will even try to deceive the elect. He warns us. He says, "I have told you about this ahead of time." So, if anyone tells you, "There he is, out in the desert," do not go out. Or, "Here he is, in the inner room," do not believe it. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Where there is a carcass, there the vulture will gather. Christ is saying his appearing will be visible, and we shouldn't believe anything else that we hear. Where the carcass is, the vultures will gather is a reference to Old Testament prophecies that talk about the great battle on the day of the Lord. So in this segment of the Olivet Discourse, we see that Christ tells his disciples very clearly what will start the period called the Great Tribulation, and that during the Great Tribulation there will be great deception, miracles, and wonders, people making all kinds of claims. He warns his disciples about this time of persecution and great deception, telling them that he has warned them about this and told them everything that will happen ahead of time.